So I'm going to be talking about process philosophy, so be warned, this might get a bit intense. And I should warn you, I have a stammer and I'm a bit jet lagged, so I probably am going to stammer at some point during this talk. And in fact, I was going to start off talking about something else, but I might start off talking about my stammer and the way that it's affected me in my life. So it's really difficult for me to sit here now and speak to all of you people. It's taken me a long time to get to this point. I developed a stammer when I was about 13 years old, which is really unusual. And the lingering memories I have from that time are of being picked on, being made fun of by people in school, of going to speech therapy to try and work out why this happened and to try and help me to overcome it using techniques. I wanted, when I was younger to be an actor. That was my dream. And I kind of gave up on that dream because of the stammer, because I didn't like the stammer. I'm sure that it would be perfectly possible for me to do it, and I actually have, I know of actors who have stammers, who have absolutely great careers. But it affected me in such a way that it stopped me from being able to do that. This kind of inheritance is what I want to talk about today. So this is what Alfred North Whitehead, the process philosopher, would call a root of inheritance. I'll speak at a bit more length about what a root of inheritance is a bit later on. I just wanted to kind of give you a little story to begin with, to kind of lead into it. This idea of roots of inheritance is going to lead into a theory of collective creativity in Larping. You probably don't see how that's going to happen at the moment from a story about me stammering when I was 13, but it will, trust me. And as I've said, this idea is underpinned by Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy of organism. And kind of the main idea is that creativity in collaborative story making can be understood in terms of the givenness of roots of inheritance. And so I'm going to be talking a bit about this idea of what we give, what is given to a LARP, and how everything that is given to a LARP scene in particular, LARP characters as well, these all have roots of inheritance that come with them. So they've all been inherited from the past. So I'm going to talk a bit about this idea of givenness and how givenness is determination, but it's also kind of a gifting. So a gifting of the past. So even though we think of this idea of determination as kind of, something which is, I don't know. So if we say something is predetermined, then we tend to think of that as not having potential. It's fixed in some way. But Alfred North Whitehead thinks in a slightly different way, and that when something is determined, it becomes potential for something else. So from that fixity, from it being a fixed idea, and in fact the only way we can be creative is by acknowledging the fixed ideas that we already have, and the things which we've inherited from our past. And it's only by acknowledging those things and recognising the potential inherent in those things that we can start to think creatively. And I'm going to talk about a character as roots of inheritance. So this idea that a Larp character is entirely made up, it's entirely constituted by roots of inheritance. It's nothing but roots of inheritance. And I'm going to introduce this idea of scening and storying as well. So instead of talking about scenes and stories as objects, talking about scening and storying as processes. Thinking about givenness first of all, I want to take this room as an example. We experience this room, so we perceive it with our eyes, with our bodies. Alfred North Whitehead would say he's the first kind of post-human philosopher, and he would say that the room also experiences us. So everything is subjective. So everything that exists in the world has subjectivity. It's not just humans that have subjectivity, it's everything. I experience the chair that I'm sitting on. I experience the air. I experience the light. But I experience, seeing the walls. I experience feeling the floor underneath me supporting me. But at the same time, Alfred North Whitehead would argue that that these things are all experiencing us as well. The floor, the walls, and the ceiling. Unless I decide to take a hammer to them, they're not gonna. It's gonna kind of their experience of me is going to be quite vague. It's not going to affect them much. I'm not particularly, I don't have much meaning for them. Whereas the air and the light, so the light is reflecting off my skin. I have an effect on the light in this room. We all do. Everything in the room has an effect on the light. The same with the air. So I'm breathing. Every time I breathe, I draw in oxygen. I convert it into carbon dioxide in my cells, and so therefore I am having a real effect on the air. The heat that I produce from my body is also having an effect on the temperature of the air, of how it moves in space. So this idea that we are not kind of just these subjects who are taking everything in, we are also objects for all of the other subjects which are in the world. And that we can think of this room in a what is called a methectic way. Methexis means participation. It's just a Greek word for participation that Plato used. And it kind of incorporates the idea of togetherness. So everything in the room together makes the room, including us. So we're not kind of immersed in the room, we are part of the room while we are here. And we affect it in particular ways. We affect the air which is in it, we affect the light. This idea of roots of inheritance is simply the idea that it's a pathway traced through the history of everything. So a ray of light which comes from the light fixtures in the ceiling, bounces off the carpet and goes into my eye. That is a root of inheritance. And Alfred North Whitehead would say that it's a similar kind of process, so that root of inheritance of the ray of light bouncing off the carpet and into my eye is a similar root of inheritance to my stammer and how that's affected me in my life. So he doesn't differentiate between physical, like a physical root of inheritance and a mental root of inheritance. In fact, everything has both physicality and mentality. And in fact, all of the hormones which are released in my body when I get anxious about stammering, they are a physical effect. Although they're triggered by something mental, they are a physical effect. And he would say that equally the stream of light particles which hits my eye after bouncing off the carpet also has some kind of mentality to it. It's a subjective thing. And then, so existing theories of participation. So I'm thinking about people like Adam Alston, who writes about immersive theatre, Marjuka Lampo, who has written about affordances, so the idea of affordances. So we as subjects see things in a particular way. So I see this as a table and it's for something. So it gives me certain affordances. I can do certain things with this table. I can do certain things with this chair, and another kind of organism would see this table and this chair in a very different way. So a mouse wouldn't see this as a table and wouldn't see this as a chair. It has different affordances for the mouse as it does for me, because of the way I'm physically built and the way the mouse is physically built. This comes from a guy called James Gibson, who spoke about affordances and kind of the way we perceive the world as these objects, and which are useful for something. So the argument I want to make is basically that these existing theories think about what we take from things. So how can I use this table? I don't think about what it gives to me or what I give to it. The affordances are all about how I can use it, how I can take something from it. It doesn't think about me in another kind of relation to the table in which we are reciprocal. So kind of extant theories on participation and play neglect the idea. So what we give to things. And this idea of methectic incorporation of things in the world, and so that's kind of where I want to go with this. So I'm going to tell you another story now about me LARPing this time. So it's going to be probably more relevant to you than a story about me stammering. So I played in a LARP called Conscience in Spain in this February just gone. It's based on the HBO series Westworld, So it's set in a theme park where robots, basically these sex robots, are there for the pleasure of the guests, and I played one of those guests. I am a gay Englishman, and I was playing an American businessman who had a wife and children, and I played him as straight. I mean, it would be possible to play that character as a closeted man, possibly, but I played him as straight. And so, kind of the roots of inheritance that I have in my life are those of an Englishman who grew up in southwestern England. They are the roots of inheritance of a gay man who grew up in a majority straight world, who, you know, battled with questions of sexuality and identity in my youth, where perhaps my character hadn't. I have never run a multinational business, so that root of inheritance isn't something that is in my history. And so it's kind of the question of where does that come from? Where do I decide what that character is when I'm not American, when I don't have children, when I'm not straight, and I don't have an embodied knowledge of what it is to run a business. And kind of the way I see it, so how I built the character, I drew on things such as all of the straight people who I know. So, which is a lot of people, particularly the straight men, obviously, because I was playing a man. So there's a lot of material for me to draw on there, and it's kind of direct experience there, where I can draw on behaviours that I've observed. I can think about how I've seen those straight men relate to other people. Obviously in public, I could never have a private experience of what it is to be a straight man. I've had 2 long-term partners, and so kind of that idea of spousehood is something that I could draw on from my own personal experience. Though obviously not kind of from a straight perspective, and I don't have personal experience of the dynamics of a straight relationship. I've never had children, but I know lots of people who have had children, and so again I can draw on experiences where I've observed people with their children, although I could never have that personally embodied experience of that. Probably the most difficult thing was the Americanness and the idea of being a businessman. I do have American friends. I have more now since being here, so that's nice. But I spent 4 months here in Boston, actually. I studied at what was then Bridgewater State College. It's now Bridgewater State University, which is just down the road from here. So I did have some kind of idea about Americanness, but there, I didn't. The majority of my idea of what it is to be American comes from TV shows and films. And so those are the roots of inheritance that I draw on when I'm thinking about this character, and even more so for the businessman aspect of this character. I don't know anyone, I don't have any friends who run multinational corporations. And so I am drawing I'm making assumptions about who this person is. I'm closing down some possibilities of what they could be because of preconceptions that I have about people who run multinational corporations, and those preconceptions have come mostly from films and television. Wow.
That's the number of slides we're on.
And so yeah, all these roots of inheritance, some of which have come from different places, so some of which have come from direct experience, some of which have come from portrayals on TV and films, some of which have come from observation of relationships between people. The character, I invested all those things in the character. I also took what was on the character sheet. That is a root of inheritance as well. So I don't try and faithfully recreate what is on the character sheet. I take the character sheet as a root of inheritance, and me and the character sheet come together methectically, so we participate with each other in this process of character. And so that's kind of the image. So the image is not of me immersed in a character, it's me kind of together with the character. So that we're kind of inseparable. And that character didn't exist before. It wasn't on the character sheet. The character sheet was simply a root of inheritance which allowed me to come to this kind of state of togetherness. So this idea of integration of roots of inheritance, and that's what the character is. I'll quickly go over these ideas of scening and storying then. So this is basically, the idea of scening is it's the process of making a scene. And so each of the characters, which is a kind of an agglomeration of roots of inheritance, so each of the characters which is involved in a scene offers those roots of inheritance into the process of the scene. So that becomes, so the scene itself kind of becomes the subjective object, which is feeling all of these characters. So we're not individually. So what I'm arguing for here is kind of a two-part process. So the scening, which is the objectification of the characters and the players in the scene as a subjective object, or a subjective object, that doesn't make sense. as a subject. And then each of the players then takes that scene as an object. So each of the subjectivities of the players takes that object of the scene into their own narrative. And that kind of explains how the singular scene can give rise to multiple narratives. And that scene then, having drawn all these roots of inheritance, becomes a root of inheritance itself. And actually becomes part of you as a subject. So the scene kind of exists within you, and will continue to exist within you as a player, and afterwards. So we get the idea of bleed is because those things are participating in you all the time. And you are drawing on your prior experiences all the time. They are participating, they are not representations, they're not kind of a later embodiment of an original idea. They are actually, they actually exist inside you. So I'll quickly wrap up now. So this idea of this oscillating process of scening and storying So the creativity arises from the givenness of the determined elements of LARPing. So the players and the characters as roots of inheritance, the design of the LARP, all of these things which we give to the scene, and then we take all of those things which happened in the scene, so as a single object, into our narrative. So let's skip through all of this. So this idea that creativity in collaborative storymaking can be understood in terms of the givenness of roots of inheritance, and then the kind of findings from all of the different slides. So we can consider that what we give to a LARP is its potentiality. So the design document, the character sheets, our own prior experiences as players, all build up into a LARP. So these things are all potentials. So they are just potential, even though they're given and they're already determined, they are potentials for something new to happen, which is what LARPing is. It's this kind of togetherness of these roots of inheritance in a creative way.